And by the way, we're going to have growth in the auto industry like nobody's ever seen. Plants are opening up all over the place. Deals are being made. Never seen. That's a combination of the election win and tariffs.
Cars are about to get more expensive in the U.S. Some may even be pulled from the market entirely.
If we see prices going up as a result of costs going up either on vehicles or parts, that means that the consumer is going to have a harder time affording these vehicles.
Economic uncertainty surrounding the North American auto industry. The big three are navigating a new era as they deal with the impact of President Trump's tariffs.
5 of America's largest automakers are pulling back from the U.S., crushed by the weight of 25% tariffs that were supposed to protect them. What was promised as a shield for workers has turned into a hammer, smashing century-old foundations, forcing production overseas, and leaving Detroit weaker than ever. The numbers expose the scale of the collapse. Costs across the sector have exploded by $41.7 billion, driving up the price of a new car by $3,000 to $10,000. Annual sales that once reached 16 million have fallen to barely 14.5 million. And globally, America's share of the auto market has plunged from 18% to under 12% in just 2 years. This isn't a temporary slowdown. It's the erosion of dominance, a signal that rivals abroad now see Detroit as vulnerable. Here's the cruel twist. While the global auto industry has lost nearly $12 billion in value, U.S. automakers alone are shouldering an additional $108 billion in costs. So what does it mean when a policy designed to protect American workers ends up driving out the very companies they depend on? Before we begin, hit that like button if you're finding this eye-opening. It really helps us beat the algorithm. Because the deeper question is unavoidable. If tariffs can push 5 iconic automakers out of America, what's next for the American dream?
Oh my goodness. I was trying to repurchase a Camry and using the prices that I had from 10 years ago, and it just wasn't, it wasn't the same.
And nowhere is this reversal more symbolic than in the fate of Ford, the company that once embodied the very idea of the American dream. The Model T, the assembly line, the promise that every family could own a car, now finds itself retreating across the border just to survive. Instead of standing taller under the protection of tariffs, Ford is bleeding. Projections show a $1.5 billion loss in 2025, compounded by an extra $2.5 billion in costs directly tied to import duties. How did a policy meant to protect American workers end up pushing America's most iconic automaker into Canada's arms? The impact is not abstract. It's physical, visible, and deeply humiliating. The legendary Super Duty pickup, once a proud symbol of Michigan's manufacturing might, is now being assembled in Oakville, Ontario. A vehicle marketed as the muscle of American industry is literally being built outside America's borders. And Canada has been quick to seize the opportunity, offering a $590 million incentive package to pull not only Ford's electric vehicle production, but also its truck operations out of U.S. soil. If Canada can lure away the crown jewel of Detroit, what other pieces of American industry are up for grabs? Behind this migration lies a perfect storm. Tariffs on steel and aluminum inflating every bolt and beam, coupled with labor unrest that makes long-term planning in the U.S. precarious. For Ford, survival has meant choosing stability, even if that stability is no longer American. So if Ford, the most iconic of them all, has been forced into exile, what chance do the others really have? If you've made it this far, you probably care. Consider subscribing to stay updated. If Ford's retreat to Canada feels like a betrayal, then GM and Chevrolet's unraveling looks more like a chain reaction, an industrial collapse spreading across the very heart of America. Once considered pillars of U.S. manufacturing, they now face the grim necessity of shuttered plants and mass exits. In Michigan, Texas, and Missouri, Chevrolet has halted production, leaving tens of thousands of workers suddenly stripped of their livelihoods. The same factories that once roared with engines and assembly lines now stand silent, symbols of a strategy gone wrong. The financial fallout is equally devastating. GM reported a $1.1 billion loss in just the second quarter alone, and forecasts warn that full-year losses could climb as high as $5 billion. Tariffs have transformed every vehicle into a liability, with pickup trucks like the Silverado and SUVs like the Blazer now costing an additional $3,000 to produce. Faced with that reality, GM has shifted production overseas, to Mexico and South Korea, abandoning the very soil it once promised to defend. How long can Detroit still call itself the home of American cars if its most iconic models are rolling off foreign assembly lines? The human toll is staggering. Across North America, as many as 50,000 jobs now hang in the balance, including 1,200 at the Cami Ingersoll plant in Canada. What began as a policy designed to secure employment has instead turned into a jobs exodus, scattering once stable communities into uncertainty. And if GM, an institution often described as too big to fail, cannot withstand the pressure, what hope remains for smaller players in the industry? And if Ford's flight and GM's unraveling weren't enough, the case of Nissan exposes just how brutal these tariffs can be. Once seen as a rare foreign success story on American soil, Nissan has been transformed from a profit maker into perhaps the largest casualty of all. Within a single year, the company slashed 20% of its U.S. production capacity, reporting a staggering net loss of $4.5 billion. Quarterly profits collapsed by 94%. Leaving executives scrambling to explain how a brand that once thrived in the American market could fall so far, so fast. The damage has been catastrophic for workers. More than 25,000 jobs have been disrupted, with 20,000 employees losing their positions outright. 7 U.S. plants have been forced to shut their doors, and the Rogue SUV, once one of Nissan's most reliable sellers, saw production drop by 13,000 units in just 3 months. Each closure isn't just a statistic, it's a shattered community. A family left without income, a town stripped of its anchor. How many more neighborhoods will turn into ghost towns before the bleeding stops? At the heart of Nissan's vulnerability lies its supply chain. With only 40–50% localization, nearly half of its components still come from Japan, South Korea, and Mexico. Under the new tariff regime, every cross-border shipment became a tax bomb waiting to explode. What was once an efficient global network has now become a costly liability, turning Nissan's integration into an albatross around its neck. And if a global player with decades of experience in lean production can't navigate this storm, what chance do others have when the tariff tide rises higher? And the collapse doesn't stop with the giants. Even companies outside the traditional big three are being dragged down by the tariff storm. Subaru, once the go-to choice for middle-class families, now faces projected losses of $2.5 billion. Prices across its lineup have climbed, with the Forester alone costing $750 to $2,000 more, undermining the brand's image of affordability. If Subaru can no longer deliver value, what does that mean for mainstream car ownership in America? Stellantis, parent of Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep, has fared no better. Rising costs forced it to suspend operations in Mexico and Canada, fractures that immediately disrupted U.S. supply lines. Nearly 900 American workers in Michigan and Indiana have already lost their jobs. And in Windsor, Canada's only minivan plant has cut another 900 positions, turning a symbol of cross-border cooperation into one of instability. If secondary players like Subaru and Stellantis are staggering, who, if anyone, can still stand firm in America's auto sector? And in the end, the weight has not fallen on corporations or executives. It has landed squarely on American workers and consumers, the very people these tariffs were supposed to defend. Imported cars now carry an average of $8,600 in extra duties, while even U.S.-assembled vehicles cost roughly $5,000 more because of inflated steel, aluminum, and component prices. The supposed shield for labor has turned into a tax stamped on every dealership sticker, making a routine purchase a financial burden. The consequences are immediate. Family-friendly SUVs and once affordable models have surged out of reach, while entire vehicle lines vanish from the market. Buyers are left with fewer, costlier options, and many households simply delay purchases. Showrooms fill with unsold inventory, and dealers brace for losses. If families can no longer afford cars, how long before entire communities start to feel the strain? The ripple effect is spreading. Auto loans are tightening, insurers are losing customers, and what began as sticker shock is snowballing into a wider drag on the economy. If owning a car becomes a luxury, what does that mean for an America built on mobility? And beneath the collapsing balance sheets lies an even deeper fracture: the supply chain itself. The North American trade architecture that once made cars cheaper, faster, and more competitive has been torn apart, leaving the entire industry disoriented. With 40% of U.S. auto parts sourced from abroad, every vehicle has effectively become a hostage of tariff politics. What was once an invisible network of efficiency is now a visible chain of costs binding every manufacturer to uncertainty. The absurdity is almost surreal. A single transmission built in Canada might cross the border 7 different times before final assembly, And with each crossing, new taxes on steel and aluminum are piled on top. Instead of flowing seamlessly across borders, components now carry a tariff scar at every checkpoint. How can Detroit compete globally when its own supply chain is being taxed into oblivion? Mexico, once a cornerstone of GM's operations, illustrates the damage vividly. Nearly $30 billion worth of components shipped annually into the U.S. have now turned into a crushing liability, each shipment swelling production costs further. Smaller American suppliers, unable to absorb or pass along these expenses, are collapsing outright as contracts vanish. And while the U.S. supply web unravels, Canada is quietly emerging as a rare point of stability, positioning itself as the alternative hub for North American manufacturing. The question now is stark. If supply chains have already broken, can the industry itself be rebuilt? Or is this the end of the integrated auto era? And so the story circles back to the most unsettling truth of all. If even Detroit, the cradle of American car making, can collapse under the weight of protectionism, what does that say about the policy itself? Experts have not minced words. They call this the clearest example yet of a strategy that has backfired. A policy meant to shield workers that instead dismantled the very foundations of their livelihood. Instead of shoring up America's industrial might, the tariffs have accelerated its erosion, handing advantage to rivals abroad. Canada, Mexico, South Korea, and Europe are quietly inheriting what America is losing: factories, contracts, and market share. The U.S. auto sector now stares at the prospect of a prolonged downturn, one that cuts not just into corporate profits but also into jobs, household stability, and even the security of supply chains critical to the broader economy. And the final, haunting question remains: if a protectionist policy can destroy Detroit, what future is left for the so-called American dream? That's where we leave you, but not without one last thought. What we've just seen is bigger than tariffs, bigger than cars. It's about the fragility of a system we once believed unshakable. If the symbols of American industry can be driven into retreat, what other pillars of the economy might be next? Could steel, energy, or even technology face the same fate? And if so, who benefits from America's retreat? Thanks for sticking around. If you found this valuable, like and subscribe to support more content like this.